Have you ever just looked at a map of Australia? It's the sixth largest country in the world, this massive island continent. But here's the thing that's so strange. For all that size, it's almost completely empty. How can a huge, modern country be so vacant?
The scale of this emptiness is just mind-boggling. I mean, we're talking about a landmass where you could fit two entire countries the size of India and still have room to spare. Yet its population is tiny in comparison. So what's the real story here? Well, get this. A staggering 95% of Australia is effectively vacant land. And almost everyone, I'm talking 90% of the entire population, is squeezed into just 5 major cities. All of that on a tiny sliver of land, just 0.22% of the whole country. It's one of the most coastal-hugging, city-dwelling populations on the entire planet.
Now, you might think the answer is simple, right? It's all about geography, deserts and stuff. But that's not even half the story. To really understand why Australia is so empty, we have to dig into a painful and often hidden history, a story that for a long time was almost completely erased.
So where do we start? Well, our story begins not with maps or mountains, but with people. See, long before any European ships appeared on the horizon, the continent was home to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. But in 1788, an arrival happened that would change everything forever.
When the British landed, they declared the continent terra nullius. It's a Latin term, and it means nobody's land. With just those 2 words, they legally pretended that the people who had lived there for tens of thousands of years simply didn't exist, and that was their justification for seizing an entire continent.
This immediately created this fundamental clash of worldviews. For Indigenous Australians, land wasn't something you owned. You were its custodian. You had a spiritual connection to it. But for the British, land was an economic resource. It was something to be owned, fenced off, and used to make money. And that difference, well, it would become the source of a devastating conflict.
And you have to remember, Britain's initial goal wasn't to build a new society. It was much darker than that. They needed a dumping ground for criminals. Between 1788 and 1868, they shipped over 162,000 convicts to Australia. The whole place was founded to be a remote, brutal, open-air prison.
So, the arrival of the British immediately unleashed 2 catastrophic consequences. The first one wasn't an army with guns, but something far more deadly, an invisible invasion of disease. The colonists brought with them a whole cocktail of European diseases that the indigenous population had never, ever encountered. With absolutely no natural immunity, things like smallpox and measles just ripped through communities like wildfire.
The impact was horrific. In the area around Sydney, smallpox alone is estimated to have killed 50% of the local Aboriginal population, half in the first year. And what makes this even more tragic is that the British had treatments for some of these illnesses, but they didn't offer them. They just left people to die.
After that first terrible wave of disease, a wave of violence followed. This was the beginning of a conflict that would last for 100 years, a fight over land, resources, and life itself.
As the colonists pushed further inland, fencing off land and taking control of precious water sources, Indigenous Australians fought back. This wasn't just a single battle. It was a long, brutal period of resistance known as the Frontier Wars, and it raged for more than a century.
The result of this century of disease and conflict was nothing short of a demographic catastrophe. By the year 1900, the indigenous population had been reduced by an estimated 90%. 90. Just let that number sink in for a moment.
And the pressure didn't stop there. In 1901, the government brought in the White Australia policy, which effectively banned all non-white immigration for decades. Then came 2 world wars. In World War I, 1 in every 5 Australian men was sent to fight in Europe. 40% of them never returned. World War II brought even more losses, and even direct attacks on Australian soil.
The legacy of this history is stark. Today, native Australians, the original inhabitants of this vast land, make up just 3.8% of the country's total population.
Okay, so that explains the tragic human story of how the land was emptied. But that was the past. With modern technology and waves of immigration, why hasn't it filled up again? Well, this brings us to the second, equally powerful reason for Australia's emptiness.
It turns out the land itself has the final say. Australia's geography is one of the most extreme and unforgiving on the planet, and it creates a massive natural barrier that just prevents widespread human settlement. You can pretty much break the continent down into 3 zones.
The Western Plateau covers 2/3 of the country, and it's almost all pure desert. Then you have the central lowlands, where the river water is often naturally salty and totally unusable for farming. That leaves the eastern highlands, the only major fertile region in the whole place.
Here's the key number: 70%. 70% of the entire Australian continent is classified as arid or semi-arid land. It's desert. You simply cannot build large cities or sustain large-scale agriculture across most of the country. It's just not possible.
So why not just live in that one fertile strip on the East Coast? Well, that region has its own massive problem: extreme weather. The equatorial sun heats up the Pacific, trade winds push all that warm, moist air towards the coast, and then a huge mountain range acts like a wall, trapping it all. The result? Catastrophic floods and powerful cyclones year after year after year. So when you put it all together, the answer to our original question becomes incredibly clear. It's a two-part verdict, shaped equally by a dark human history and an unyielding, unforgiving natural landscape. It's really two sides of the same coin. On one side, you've got the historical factors: a legal idea that declared the land empty, diseases that wiped out a population, a century of war, and policies designed to keep people out. And on the other side, you have the geographic reality: a continent that's mostly desert, with unusable water, and a habitable zone that gets hammered by extreme weather.
It's a powerful way to put it. A painful human history decimated a population, and a harsh geography prevents it from recovering. The stage was set by human tragedy, and the final act was sealed by an unforgiving landscape.
And this leaves us with a final thought. We now understand the complex reasons behind Australia's emptiness, this whole story of loss and limitation. But the bigger question now is, what comes next? In a world facing climate change and shifting populations, what does the future hold for this vast, empty continent?